Hello everybody, my name is Daniel Press and I'm one of the new administrators here at Redbase Gallery, and I'm also on the board at Drawspace Gallery in Enmore. Today we have a very special guest here, particularly for those who appreciate the magical craft of drawing. Michael Esson has taught many of my lecturers at COFA, and he's been a fixture in the Australian drawing scene, being the Australian Director of the International Drawing Research Institute at COFA, and previously a contributor to the development of glass since his arrival on our shores from Scotland in 1974. He is a very studied figurative drawer, but also one guided by wanderlust and intuition. Born in Scotland in 1950, Scottish history and folklore are glimpsed throughout his reoccurring metaphors, but what's more is his anatomical study, so dedicated that he has contributed to the field of medical education by developing artistic courses to assist plastic surgeons, the impetus of which came from a formative residence at the Royal College of Surgeons. Some metaphors and meanings came much later in life, and it's this dance that circles his recent work. Ribbons, butterflies, flowers, tango with razors, rats and crows, all alluringly rendered in this exhibition, The Evolution of Angels. The juxtaposition of beauty and ugliness has run as an undercurrent across his career, where he examines the fluidity between the two terms. Rats, for example, once the harbingers of death, is now in the form of plague, is now a positive subject in research, assisting numerous medical and psychological advances in social behaviour. So today I'm going to ask him some questions under the theme Then and Now, where I inquire chronologically about his life and artistic career and locate the traces of such in his present day body of work. So Michael, I'm going to take you back to the 1960s. You're 10 years old, and your steadfast focus on drawing was underway. You could have been a dancer, winning a competition as a Scottish Highland dancer, but as a reward you asked your parents to get a book. So my then question is, can you tell us what book that was and what impact that had on your decision to become an artist?
Yes, believe it or not, I was a dancer at one stage in my life. I used to dance at the various gatherings in Scotland and danced at Braemar for the Queen and all that stuff. And my parents used to bribe me to do this. And one occasion I asked for, because I won the competition, I asked for a book, and it happened to be a book called All About Leonardo da Vinci. And I've still got that book. And, it was quite instrumental in forming my idea of what an artist was. And so I suppose the interest in anatomy came from there and so on. But I think the other thing is that there must have been something before that caused me to actually ask for that particular book. But that I've lost in memory, So that was an influential thing that I got at those times, and it's still runs true today.
Yeah, and when you told me it earlier, it made a lot of sense. There was something in your line work. It's both precise, but there's moments where it's wavy, loose, and surgically precise, much like Da Vinci's own line work. So my now question is, in your practice as you approach kind of the penmanship or linemanship of your work, how have you infused some of these early Old Master influences into your approach?
I think just luckily in Scotland, the change from drawing being fundamental that was happening in the 60s in Britain and London and so on, that had never quite got to Scotland. So we had still very strong medical training. Drawing training. And we did life drawing, we did anatomy, and draped life and antique drawing and so on. So all of that was fairly central to that practice then, as it is still now. But it was that anatomy stuff, I suppose, that was the thing that triggered my interest. And I've always been interested in death and I'm Scottish after all, and I used to wander the graveyards in Scotland and so on. And then, of course, these four figures here are the four dancers of death. I actually started this one probably 12 years ago. At that time, it was titled The Fourth Dancer. So I always knew I was going to do the other three, and the last one was finished at the end of last year. So the dancing thing sort of emerged from that, and from my interest in the death, and the word in Chinese for four is si, S-I, as is the word for death. So there was this sort of relationship that I was interested in at that time. And you'll see am I jumping the gun here?
No,
Okay, just rambling on. So the broken umbrella has become quite a central issue. And it happened much like a day like today in Beijing. And it happened that there was a storm. And often after a storm, you might find a broken umbrella just cast away in the garbage. And on that particular day, I thought, well, that says something about us, the human condition, that once our function is over, we are disposed of. And therefore, that became a metaphor throughout the drawings. And here, of course, I'm using the figure coming out of it much in the same way as Botticelli's Venus comes out of the birth of the figure rather than the death of the figure. So there's these sorts of references that run throughout the work. And
you said as you were a kid and you were kind of walking through the side of your childhood, you'd pass stained glass windows with lilies and stuff, and flowers has been another kind of reoccurring motif that emerged out of
Did I tell you that?
I read it.
You read it, okay. Yeah, I mean, I started doing lilies in some of my drawings, and I don't think there are any lilies in this show. Anyway, I did start doing some lilies, and I then revisited where I was actually born, in a hotel in the northeast of Scotland, and there was a stained glass window there with lilies on it. And it was exactly the same lilies that I drew 30 years later, and I'd no memory of it directly until it's triggered. I think those things happen. Whether they're purely coincidental or not, I don't know.
And after that initial kind of surrounding in kind of Scottish folklore and kind of the supernatural kind of underpinnings of the place, but also the influence of Da Vinci, you ended up in art school, as many do. And can you tell us a little bit about your early days at art school at both Aberdeen and Edinburgh? And what kind of artist had you become by the time you arrived in Australia?
Well, I started studying in Aberdeen, called Grace School of Art in Aberdeen. Did 2 years, in those days, general course, 2 years of general course, and then went on to specialise. And then after 2 years in Aberdeen, I realised that Aberdeen wasn't exactly where I wanted to be, and I moved to Edinburgh, to the Edinburgh College of Art. And in those days, you could only transfer from one school to another school if the school you were wanting to transfer to had a department that your previous school didn't have. And so I started studying glass. So I became a glass artist.
Yeah, and this is kind of somewhat, like, you've got some famous works that ended up in New York and stuff, but that is an understated thing, being initially known as a sculptor and a glass artist. But can you tell me about some of the early glass works you did, particularly like after you arrived in Melbourne and started the glass department there?
Well, I started, I was brought out to set up a glass department in what was Caulfield Institute of Technology in those days, which subsequently became Monash. And that was really the first glass department in Australia. I didn't like Melbourne very much. I went back to London to do my master's degree, and then came back to Australia in 1977. And I suppose I was known as a glass artist in those days. And I selected a major exhibition called Directions in Glass Art, which was shown at the Powerhouse and National Gallery Victoria and so on.
As well?
Yeah. Started off in Perth, yeah. And it was quite an influential exhibition. But subsequently, I didn't, when I came back, the director of the art school then was Ken Reinhardt. And I think he always wanted me to maybe think about setting up a glass department, but I never did. I veered off more into sculpture and particularly into drawing.
And do you think your glass work had a correlation to the development of your drawing practice, or were you always kind of working on both?
I was always working on both, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. So you understandably got a bit tired of Melbourne and returned to the Royal College of Arts in London. Can you tell us a bit about your 2-year stint in England, namely about holograms?
Yeah, I did this on my very first day of study at the Royal College.
Give you a second moment.
My father died, and I did a piece of glass, a self-portrait piece, that was a skull and a hologram and so on, and that was in 1977, and I think that was early days of holography, and I started working with Loughborough University to do this piece of hologram. So it was a skull, a glass carving of a skull inside a glass cube, which the back sheet of the glass cube was a holographic plate that projected the skull into space behind it. So it was a bit corny, but it was like the body and the soul sort of thing that was happening there. So, and that was possibly, I suppose it was called my masterpiece, literally, because it was the last piece I did for my master's degree, which is how traditionally one referred to a master's piece. And then since then, really, I gave up glass completely when I came back to Australia.
Yeah. Because you started to take yourself a little bit more seriously as a drawer, but it seems your drawing practice really started to develop since then. One of the earliest key works being the Running Doctors of
Marseille. Yeah.
Maybe you were starting to get a little bit homesick with metaphors being infused, like cloddy wells, ribbons, body snatchers, and wickermen. Can you talk about some of the initial works that you did in your drawing practice?
Yeah, I did quite a bit of stuff in Scottish histories and things like where I used to visit Clootie Wells. Clootie was the Scottish name for a piece of cloth, and they used to hang up bits of cloth near old wishing wells. And it was, I think the Japanese do a similar thing. They hang bits of cloth to trees and so on. And so I did stuff like that, and they transferred from being clooties into ribbons and so on. The Running Doctors of Marseille was a very significant group of work for me, because it was about the doctors during the plague in the 18th century. And that's where I first became interested in the rats. I hate rats. They scare the hell out of me. But
you can't stop drawing them.
Well, they're wonderful things to draw, but it was the fleas from rats that were actually causing the plague. And subsequently I've used rats over the years. And as we see in this exhibition. Am I jumping too much again?
No. Well, it's then and now. So let's talk a little now. Yeah. These are new sculptures that you made. They're part cardboard, part plastic, part drawing, part sculpture. Can you tell us a little bit about how they were constructed and some of the choices that you made developing them? They look a little bit like nutcrackers, some of the...
I don't know how they start. They just start making them. I make them out of cardboard, body shapes, and add the legs and whatever, and they just emerge over a period of time. But and there's a bit of wire that becomes the tail that's wrapped in cloth and so on.
And there's some coarse fur in that, almost looking like toilet brushes.
Well, they did come from toilet brushes, those, yeah. I only say that, and there's a bit of toilet brush over there. Oh, there is a lily there. I forgot about that lily. I do collect old toilet brushes, I have to say. No donations at the moment. But I did a drawing a few years ago, which was, again, this idea of ugly and beautiful. And it's in Chinese, mei her cho, correct? Ginger mei her cho. Mei her cho. So help me, somebody. It just means ugly and beautiful in Chinese. Yeah. Okay. My bad pronunciation. Anyway. What was I saying? Oh, yes. So I did these drawings, and I had a sort of vase, and into the vase I put some Chinese calligraphy brushes, which are very beautiful things, and they're very well crafted and so on. But I thought it would be nice to have some toilet brushes in the same vase. So there was this juxtaposition of the ugly and the beautiful, or what we perceive as both ugly and beautiful.
And another symbol of yours is the wire coat hanger that you usually put in these like very lacy type materials, but you also have a historical figure that you reference in these works.
Yeah, I did a show called Delusions of Grandeur at one stage, and I do think artists can often tend to having delusions of grandeur, and but I thought the classic image of being deluded of grandeur is Napoleon. And the coat hanger somehow resembled the Napoleonic hat. And that's how the wire, the skeleton of the coat hanger came about. And more recently it became, upholstered, embodied, if you like, with those granny coat hangers that you get in second-hand shops.
My
and things.
nan gives me one every Christmas,
Yeah.
and I've got a closet filled with very fluffy looking.
Yeah, well, I've got a collection of those as well.
So another key thing that you did, reaching the 90s, but I think starting in the 80s, was you had a very important residency at the Royal College of Surgeons,
Yeah.
and you spent a lot of time there digging through the archives and watching surgeries happen. Can you tell us a little bit different this time, because I know that you've taught plastic surgeons how to draw and how to produce artworks to assist their practice, but is there something that you've learned from medical practitioners as an artist?
Well, let me just go back. I got this job as I gave a lecture in London at one stage to a guy to the Royal College, a guy called Philip King, who was a sculptor, and he was the head of drawing at the Royal College that day. And he said to me when I gave the lecture, "That's a better lecture than I'm going to give tomorrow," which was at the Royal College of Surgeons in London. And subsequently, he asked me if I'd like to do a PhD between the Royal College of Surgeons in London and the Royal College of Art. And I thought, that sounds a good idea, but anyway, it didn't happen for all sorts of practical reasons. And as a result, I did get a year's residency at the Royal College of Surgeons, and I chose Edinburgh rather than London. It suited me better and my family better at that time. So I had all these options to go into the theatre and watch the operations. I had access to all the archives and to the museum, and where the body snatchers were, some of their plaster casts of body snatchers and so on. Whether the surgeons themselves and their activity reflect on what I do, it's more interested in the history of medicine and the evolution of techniques and so on.
And the
I'm interested.
correlation to drawing.
Yeah.
itself,
I mean, it's also interesting to do with sculpture. I remember teaching a young Chinese surgeon in Beijing, and we're talking about the double eyelid, you know how the Chinese like the double eyelid thing. And I was saying, when I'm drawing and sculpting, when I'm drawing the left eye of the person, for me that's very easy, because my natural flow is in that direction. When I'm doing their right eye, it's sort of a bit more awkward to cut. And he was saying how, he said, he's tried to tackle this. And how he tackled it was he tried to make himself ambidextrous by using chopsticks with his left hand, which I thought was a wonderful cultural thing to try and do. And he was actually, so he used his right hand to do the left eye and the left hand to do the right eye.
That would,
So there was a correlation with drawing and sculpture to the practice of surgery there, I think.
No, that's really cool. And you arrived back and you became part of the Drawing Institute at COFA, which you eventually became the director of, which was a landmark institute in the development of Australian drawing practice. I'm going to ask you a few questions about your time there, but my first is, how did you get involved and what were some of the early institute's activities?
Well, Ian Howard, after Ken Reinhardt was the director of the college, he retired and Ian Howard took over. And Ian always talked to every member of staff saying, what are your plans for the future? How do you think it's going to develop and what's your ambition? And I said, well, I didn't actually want to run the drawing courses because that's fairly It's all about running timetables and nonsense. So I said I'd like to do something with drawing, and I'd been to visit China with Ian, and I'd worked at the Central Academy of Fine Art in Beijing, which is probably the most important art school in China. And so we made this relationship between COFA, Central Academy in China, and Glasgow School of Art in Scotland, where I was a visiting professor. So we used to do projects, we used to do exhibitions. I think I ran about maybe 5 conferences, mainly here in Sydney, and certainly we did one in Dalian in China.
And you had some survey shows at COFA galleries like Anxiety, Chinese Whispers, and Liberation Feet.
Yeah, we did the shows, we did conferences, we did projects. I mean, one of the projects that came out of that, which was a real buzz, was I got involved in designing a fashion show in Shanghai, because the guy who was in the university there wasn't a drawer, he was a graphic designer, but he said, I want to do some project with the Drawing Institute. Let's do it, evolving fashion, because the Shanghai University was the most important fashion school in China. Donghua University. And so we started doing that. I had no experience of designing clothes, and he hadn't either. So I just ended up designing 25 garments and getting them made up in China, and then getting them back and drawing them and getting them embroidered and putting on the final show, which was amazing. Selecting the models that believe me, I've never been to a Chinese brothel, but I can imagine it, because all these models would come in and I'd say, I'll have that one. And she looks nice, turn around, yeah, I'll have that one. So I had all these choices of models that I could use. I had to design their clothes and their hair and their makeup and everything else. And it was a buzz, 2,000 people came to the catwalk show. An experience you could never replicate in this country. I mean, the costs would be phenomenal. And it was just one of those things that came out of the Drawing Institute that gave me a personal opportunity to do something I would never have anywhere else.
And you've done a series of workshops over in China as well on teaching drawing fundamentals and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've been to China about 50 times, I think. All in all. Yeah.
A lot then, yeah. And one of the predominant symbols you came across was the umbrella, and you've talked a little bit about that, but I've noticed in your later careers, some of the works that you have started producing were usually based on an encounter, where it kind of left the realm of anatomical history and moved towards being these kind of encounters while traveling. So can you talk a little bit about some of the symbols that you've encountered in Pakistan and also China, and how they've weaved into your practice?
Yeah, I think traveling for me is very important, but I think it's Alan Bulleton wrote a book on traveling, and you have to, when you travel, it's great for broadening your experience and so on, but you have to be receptive at that point in time. And it just so happened that when I was in Beijing and I saw the broken umbrellas, it somehow triggered something in my mind. I could have passed broken umbrellas 200 times before then, but on that occasion it meant something. And then another time when I was in Pakistan, I was taken to a beach outside Karachi to see turtles coming out of the water to lay their eggs. And we got to the beach and we were sitting down on the beach, and of course the turtles had been and gone. I mean, they all happened within about 2 days or something, and they came up and they lay their eggs and they disappear. And I was sitting there, no turtles, forgot it. And it just triggered something. The beach came round, and at this point here at the end of the beach was called Paradise Point. And that's where the idea generated, searching for turtles in paradise came from. And, I think we're all searching for those turtles. And we don't find them very often.
And it's also a curious metaphor that you've used, because it also becomes a hand grenade as well. And it's got these additional kind of both beautiful but also violent or scary or ugly kind of connotations too.
Yeah, I mean, the way the turtle's shell is segmented, sort of again, just because I happened to be in Karachi at that time, and there was a bit of trouble around at that time in that part of the world. My turtles became hand grenades because the way they're segmented in the back and so on. It just generated that sort of idea. So you'll see a few hand grenades referring to the searching for turtles.
One of the other shows that you did in Karachi was called Where Do Butterflies Go? And it comes from a 1985 poem that you did as a dad, kind of explaining to your kid a little bit where butterflies go. But I wonder how, because you work on works for upwards of 12 to sometimes even more potentially years, how do you view time in the creation of an artwork and going back to those moments, but also like kind of taking on board a lot of these present symbols that surround you?
Well, I think, as you say, I mean, some of the work in this exhibition is old work. Some of it's old, but it's been revisited. Some is new, finished last week. So I don't ever see a time scale. I mean, sometimes perhaps if you, when I finish a work, I might finish it, I might fix it with fixative spray. I've had examples of that going off and being exhibited, and then coming back to me and thinking, I didn't actually quite finish that conversation with myself. So that's what it is. For me, it's a conversation with myself about what I'm doing. And so I've had to unframe the drawing and then rework it. I showed you an example of it the other day.
So you've actually had to like deassemble a frame in some
cases.
cases.
And then you continue the conversation, you know. So if anybody here doesn't want me, as I'm getting older, speaking to myself, buy one of my drawings, and then I don't have to revisit it, you see. I think that's a good idea.
Earlier, when we were doing the price list, I was like, hey, Michael, you haven't given us the dates of the artworks, and you're like, I'm not going to.
No, it doesn't happen like that for me.
It's an interesting thing, but which is the most recent work that you've done for this exhibition?
The Evolution of Angels is the most recent, and these ones I've been working on for a little while now, but that was sprayed, fixative sprayed, I think, on Thursday or Wednesday of this week.
More recently as well, there was a major moment for everyone that they experienced a couple of years ago, and they have bled into your recent drawings, which was COVID with face masks and ventilators and stuff coming into your practice. Was there any details about that particular point of time and how it's started to come out in some of your drawings?
Not so much COVID as such, but the fact that we now, instead of the rats being the baddies, if you like, from the plague and so on, we use them, as you said, in medical research and so on.
And rat tests.
And memory tests and so on. And as one gets older, one does think about those things a little bit. And so these creatures have been of benefit to humanity rather than, a negative to humanity and so on. As I say, they scare the hell out of me, the rats, but that's just my perception of them. And of course, the crows, the rats in a sense have become crows, which are also often associated with death too, as well.
Also very intelligent and
very
gorgeous creatures as well.
Has MD noticed the actual crow here? Oh, you have? Yes, okay.
It scared the photographer when he came in this morning. He thought it was like an actual bird in the studio. A couple more questions and then we'll wrap up.
Yes.
But one of them was, what has been your thoughts on the way that drawing has developed in Australia over the years, and what do you kind of see for its present day or future?
I think, well, when I first came, I came here in the 70s, and drawing really was on a dip at those times. I mean, art schools in Europe in particular were throwing out their plaster casts and getting rid of their drawing, so exercises and their classes and so on. And then when we started the Drawing Institute, that was in 1999, and I thought we had proved a point in a sense, and drawing had sort of re-emerged as a fundamental sort of process. I hesitate to use the word training or education, but as a process. And But then more recently, I think it's dipped again, and it's nice to see places like Drawspace trying to, redefine it, and so that it's got an extra life coming in. But look, I think it's the most immediate tool of invention we have. And
close to the genesis of thought and such.
Often I give a lecture on the plastic surgeons and so on, and I've got a wonderful video about a heart surgeon talking about how he draws. Before an operation, he plans it out, he discusses it with his colleagues, and then during the operation, if he's doing a heart transplant or whatever, while he's waiting for the heart to start pumping again, you see him in theatre taking out a piece of paper, laying it on the body of the patient, dipping his forceps into the blood and drawing with the blood, and then describing and communicating to his colleagues what he's just done and what he will just continue to do. He also dips it into the blood with adrenaline, which is less thick and is more transparent. So he gets a wonderful tonal value with the blood he uses for drawing. And you can see, I use sanguine primarily in my drawing, and of course sanguine is the name for blood, or bloody.
All right, I have one more question for you, and I ask everybody this question, because it's a very generic question, but what's next for Michael Esson?
I don't know. The only thing that I thought of, when I hung these up the other day, there was 2 extras, and I thought, that sounds a pretty good title. Too many rats, and that might become a title for the next show. I'm not sure, but too many rats was quite good. Right. But so let me just say something.
No worries.
I'd like to thank Nancy particularly for assisting me in organising this show. I was introduced to Nancy by an old friend called Jinsha from China, one of my oldest friends there, and since then, Nancy was, welcoming and putting on this show for me, and she's amazing. She's very dangerous with that drill in her hand.
Yes.
You have to be very careful.
She insisted on putting all the nails in herself.
She does all the lighting. She does it up the ladder. She's amazing. So thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Daniel, and for the rest of the staff at Redbase. I really appreciate it. Thank you, and thanks for coming in this miserable afternoon.
And congratulations on the evolution of angels.
Thank you.